Once you get to World Tier 4 Torment and you're looking to become level 100, remember that even though Nightmare Dungeons give the most experience, you can also be hitting multiple birds with one stone during this part of your journey. For example, while you're trying to level up, you might as well get all of the renown, farm Forgotten Souls, get your glyphs to level 15, and pick up all ancestral items you find, because the items you find at level 70 could be better than what you find at level 100. All of these activities have their own purpose alongside your experience progression to 100, because when you reach 100, you're not gonna want to feel obligated to do any of these other things. Let's talk about itemization. A common misunderstanding about item power breakpoints is that any item higher than 725 is as good as it's gonna get, because according to the breakpoints chart, it's the highest tier of item, right? Well, yes and no. All percentage and stat-based affixes max out above item power 725, but maximum life, for example, keep rolling higher depending on the item power. Let me make this crystal clear for you. Look at these 4 rings. They range from item power 749 to 803, and there are hidden breakpoints within there. About every 10 or so item power, the maximum possible life roll goes up by like 30. So the 749 ring, as you can see, can roll maximum 590 life, whilst the 803 ring can roll 746. That's over 150 more life simply from having a higher item power on the ring. And this is without upgrading the items, so this gap would only increase by quite a lot. So a lot of people think there's no real benefit to having 800 and plus item power gear, but it's actually essential if you want to min-max your character, especially when it comes to the weapons you're using to attack. The higher the item power, the higher the damage, which is key to your overall damage output. So if I'm a ranged rogue, the item power and damage of my bow and crossbow are crucial, and the item power and damage of my swords mean nothing. Only the affixes on them do, and vice versa. And when it comes to your armor pieces, meaning your helm, chest, gloves, pants, and boots, these also benefit from being as high item power as possible, as their armor numbers go up significantly. And not only that, if you're rolling life on them, just like with the rings, the maximum life on a 738 item power helm is 567, where on a 804 helm, you can get up to 746 life. It's like 200 more life and 100 more armor. So although the item power of your items isn't as important as getting the right affixes, it's still quite a significant boost to your character, which is why people go out to find these super unique monsters that drop like 840 item power items. The Codex of Power is known for giving you the lowest possible roll of any given aspect, but at least it gives you the aspect, right? It's great for leveling. But any aspect that rolls a flat number and not a percentage is actually way better coming from the Codex than any legendaries you can find on the ground, because this number scales to your level. This might not be intentional from Blizzard and might change in the future, we'll see, but for now, for example, the defensive aspect Protector that gives you a 10-second barrier when you hit elites, it rolls like 3,000 to 4,000 higher from my Codex than a perfect roll from what I can find from items on the ground. Let's talk about what loot to keep and trading. I recommend you keep at least one of each legendary aspect in your stash. Just keep at least the highest roll of each, because you never know when you want to change a build or when Blizzard decides to buff an aspect that you initially thought was garbage. And for the best and most commonly used aspects, like disobedience, like it's literally used for every build, you want to keep all of these if they're perfectly rolled, and I keep at least 3 of all the best aspects in my stash at all times. Ideally, they're all perfect rolls, but if not, I keep the 3 best rolls that I can, and I get rid of anything lower than that. I do all of this so that I can easily experiment and try new builds in the endgame, as well as upgrade my current build if I happen to find a better base item to put the aspect on than what I'm currently using. As you find loot in Diablo 4, you not only want to think about what would make you and your current character and build stronger, you want to keep in mind future builds you want to try down the line. Are you going to try kill Uber Lilith? Make sure you know what you need for that and start saving rare items for it. Keep all items that will be useful for that. If you don't do this from the moment you hit level 70, it's going to take you so much time later on to find all these items. Also, gold never stops being valuable in this game. I'd argue you never want to stop picking up all the ancestral rares just to sell them. I'd say if you have less than 30 million gold, you're running the risk of running out of gold. I have never salvaged any items after I completed the campaign, by the way. So with how small the stash is, how do we save all these items for later? What you have to do is you have to make mules, secondary characters just level 1 to hold items on. This is really annoying, but at least it lets you hold and bank up a lot of items for later. Oh, and this is also where trading comes in. If you find an insane, perfectly rolled rare item, you can either use it yourself to feel powerful, or you can trade it to get rich using the Diablo 4 trading Discord, for example. And now you can can use all that gold to trade yourself a bunch of other items to upgrade your gear if you want. When it comes to unique items, it might seem obvious, but you only need to keep one of each unique item in your stash. That being the one that rolled the best, obviously, because the affixes will always be the same for these items. One final note for items: once per hour, all vendors reset their stock, and the items from vendors have the potential to be some of the best you can find. So as you go to sell your items, rotate which vendor you go to and make it a habit to check what they're selling. Look for rare items with 725 item power or higher and see if they have rolled the stats you're looking for. Uber Lilith. You should know the cost of entry for fighting her. You'll need a lot of gold to respec and re-roll your items for a proper boss build. You'll need a lot of gold to repair your gear when you've died a couple times. You'll need elixirs to give yourself the best chance of beating her. Committing to beating Lilith can be quite expensive and time consuming. And I'd say there are two ways to go about this fight. You either have a really strong ethical build that can kill her in about 5 to 10 minutes, but it'll be a big challenge. You'll need a lot of attempts and perfect execution. Or you use an overpowered exploited build just to kill her easily in 30 seconds and get the exclusive horse mount. It's up to you, but don't even waste your time trying to kill her with a useless, weak build. A good test to evaluate a minimum DPS, damage per second baseline, is to see if you can get her to spawn the first 2 adds before she sends her first spike waves at you at the start of the fight. So if you're able to get her to the N on her health bar before she sends spikes at you, that's how you know your DPS is high enough, generally speaking. Depending on your class, this can vary slightly. Nightmare dungeon pushing. Unless you're a ranged build, you need to be as tanky as possible. Everything will essentially one-shot you otherwise, and even with 16,000 armor, my rogue still dies a lot at tier 100, so we want all sorts of life, armor, and damage reduction from our gear, including on our amulet, and of course anything defensive we can put our hands on in our Paragon board. For ranged builds, you have the option to either be able to tank 1 or 2 hits, or just go pure glass cannon. Nothing but damage. Best defense is offense kind of thing. Now, I don't think this is a consistent strategy at all, so my recommendation is definitely the tanky route. No matter your build, however, if you can crowd control the monsters, you'll stand a way greater chance at succeeding in high tier nightmare dungeons. With my build, I'm essentially perma-stunning elites, making the whole experience a lot easier. Now, it can be really hard to get a good nightmare dungeon sigil when you're trying to push the higher tiers, meaning you're gonna want one of the easier dungeons with the easiest affixes, and oftentimes you end up with really long and tough dungeons with impossible affixes. This means that sigil powder, the material used to craft these sigils, become really valuable as it gives you more chances to get an easier sigil. The way I farm this sigil powder as a solo player is I save a couple tier 50 to 70 sigils for the dungeons with the most density, like Champion's Demise and Blind Burrows, because it seems like sigils have a fixed drop rate from any monster within the dungeon. So by killing 1,000 spiders in one Blind Burrows run, I find that I get like 2 to 4 sigils just from one run. So even when I hit 0 sigil powder, I'm not completely screwed, as I can just open one of these up to go farm random sigils for a bit, and then I just salvage all other sigils. The key here being you never want to run completely out of sigils, so always keep a few just as a buffer. There's only 3 things you really need to know about the Paragon board. All of the rare nodes get a boost if you meet a stat requirement, and this requirement is super easy to meet in your first 3 boards or so, because the requirement goes up for each board that you attach. So for board 4, and especially 5 and 6, you usually need to be pretty strategic if you want to meet those requirements. You might need to take different nodes along the way that aren't your main stat, or you might want to prioritize some plus to stats on some of your gear, like in your helm, boots, or weapons, just to make sure that you meet as many of these requirements as possible. Only if it makes sense for your build, of course. The second thing is that glyphs are super powerful. You level them up at the end of nightmare dungeons and they get increased range at level 15, and their max level is 21. They're like 5 times more powerful at level 21 than they are at level 1, so definitely level them up. All glyphs also get a bonus if you meet the stat requirements within its range. This is always worth it, and you want to make sure that when you attach a board, you think of which glyph should go on that board, as each board only has 1 slot for a glyph, and each board has a different amount of stats available within the range of the glyph. So for example, for me as a rogue, the strongest glyph is exploit, which requires strength. So I want to make sure I put my exploit glyph on the board that has the highest amount of strength nodes available. Now, you can't easily see this in game game, you have to manually read each node. It sucks. So what I recommend is you go to a D4 planner site like Maxroll, where their Paragon board informs you of this information. Like here I can see that the board No Witness would be the best board for my exploit glyph because it has 54 strength within the glyph range, and all the other boards have like 39 or 40 something. Number 3, there's 2 different strategies with your Paragon. Since we're only able to get 225 points, the best strategy is often to just go into a board, grab the glyph, and immediately move towards a new board with a new glyph. This way you can reach up to 6 or 7 separate boards and glyphs. You're going deep into your Paragon, but not very wide on each board, if that makes sense. The other strategy is the opposite. You basically max out each board, grabbing all the useful rare nodes you can find, but in the end you only reach 4, maybe 5 boards, limiting the amount of glyphs you can use, but giving you other bonuses along the way. There's no right or wrong here, it all depends on your build. I highly encourage you to just trust yourself, enjoy experimenting and exploring the Paragon on your own without following a build guide. This is way more fun in my opinion. Plus, it's not permanent. You can undo the entire Paragon later on for about 8 million gold or so you can optimize it then or follow a guide if you want. Just know that your character's power is about 50% gear and 50% Paragon, so if you're struggling with damage or survivability, chances are it's because of your Paragon board. My final tip for the Diablo 4 endgame is to just find Shaco. It's the best helm. It gives you +4 to all skills and a ridiculous amount of damage reduction. Last time I checked, it's about a 1 in 140 million chance that it drops, so good luck. I'm curious, did you learn something from this video? Leave a comment below and link this to your friends if it was helpful.